My name is Yosef, and this is the second exercise in the Practicing Functional JavaScript series. This is the repository for these exercises right here. And if you go to the exercises section, you can find twofer, the second exercise that we're going to solve today. So let's get started. I'll switch over to my editor, and under exercises, source exercises, twofer, we can find the README where we can find out about this problem and see what we have to do. So twofer is short for 2 for 1. 1 for you and 1 for me. Given a name, return a string with the message 1 for x, 1 for me, where x is the given name. And if the name is missing, return the string 1 for you, 1 for me. So here are some example inputs and their corresponding outputs. And the main thing to notice is that when we actually have a name, we want that name to be in the return message. And if we don't have a name, we just want the default message, 1 for you, 1 for me. All right, so here's the file that we'll use to solve this problem. And I'll start, actually, let's look at the spec first. So there's 3 tests, no name given, a name given, and a different name given. So now I'll run the tests. All right, so the first test is failing as expected because we're throwing this error here. And actually, let's remove the function entirely, and let's actually start by writing a Hindley-Milner type signature for the function. If you're not familiar with this type system, please check out the README for this repository, and there's also resources there to find out more. But I'll write the signature as a comment. Twofer is a function from string to string. So this is saying that we will have a function called twofer that takes a string type as input and returns a string type as output. So I'll define that function now. And make sure to export it, because over here it's saying that twofer is not a function. Okay, so we have our first failing test. And as expected, we're not actually returning anything, so we're receiving undefined. So we should be able to make this pass in the simplest way by simply returning 1 for you, 1 for me. All right, so first test is passing. Let's enable the next test and see it fail. And it's failing because now that we're actually passing in a name, we want that name to be part of the message. So in order to fix this, let's define that name parameter. And let's check if there is not a name. This is when we want the default message. All right, still passing. And if there is a name, then we want the dynamic message. So we'll use template string literals for this. 1 for, and interpolate name, 1 for me. All right, so we have solved, well, actually, there's one more test. Let's see. So this one should pass too. Okay, so tests are passing. That's a pretty strong indicator that we've solved this problem. So so as you can see, there's actually this error message right here. This is a linting error. And this is coming from the ESLint functional plugin. The actual error is no conditional statement. Unexpected if, use a conditional expression, a ternary operator instead. So you can read more about this rule at the ESLint functional plugin functional website, and you can find out more about this in the README for this repository as well, if you want to understand more about this. But for now, let's just do what it says, and let's change this if statement to use a ternary operator instead. All right, so let's check the name. And if we have a name, we want this dynamic message still. But if we don't have a name, then we want the else value to be the default string. All right, so this is still passing. And let's get rid of the older version. And we can simplify this by getting rid of the block, the function block. All right. So now that we have made this more functional, we can look at what else we can do to make it more functional. And to do this, we're going to use a popular functional library called Ramda. And let's start by actually refactoring this ternary operator and using a Ramda utility for that. So I'll go to the Ramda documentation and look up if-else. And we can see that this is a function, and if we expand the parameters, it takes 3 function arguments. So it's a ternary function. And the first argument is a predicate function, which, if true, it will invoke the onTrue function, which is the second parameter. And if the predicate function returns a falsy value, it will invoke the onFalse function. And finally, if-else returns a function. So this is an important part to remember because we will have to pass the data, the value that we're actually going to use to the function that if-else returns. So let's see what this looks like. I'll import if-else from Ramda. And we're not going to use the ternary operator, so we'll call if-else instead. And the important thing with if-else is we need, since it returns a function, we need to somehow get this name to check into if-else, and we'll pass it to the function that if-else returns right here. And now the first argument. The first argument is a predicate function, and the purpose of this is to check whether the name exists. So Ramda has a utility for this called isNil. And we can see right here, it has one parameter, the value to test, and it returns a Boolean true if the value is undefined or null. Otherwise, it returns false. So let's import this, isNil, and pass it in there as the first argument. Okay, so if the name is nil, then we want the constant value. We want the 1 for you, 1 for me. I'll copy this up here first. But it won't quite work to pass just the message, since if you recall, if-else, the second parameter takes an onTrue function. And so Ramda has a utility for this, always. And so always, it takes a value and it wraps it in a function. And so the purpose of this is so that we can compose constant values, as in this case that we need right here. So I'll import always. And so we want to call it right here, always. All right, so this is the onTrue case for isNil, if the name is nil. And then for the onFalse case, for this we're gonna create a custom function, and I'll define it right here. Let's start with the signature. So I'll call it interpolate, and this is a function from string to string. So this is saying that interpolate expects 3 parameters as input, and they're all strings, and it returns a type string for the output. All right, I'll define interpolate now. And the first parameter, we'll call it before, the next parameter, after, and the last parameter, the value. And so what this is actually going to do, it's just going to concatenate the before with the value and the after. So there's many ways that we could do this. We could use interpolation as we did previously, but this is another way using a function that I thought would be interesting to try. All right, so now I'm going to add interpolate right here. And we're going to run into an issue, but we'll see that in a second. So the before value will be 1, 4, and then the after value will be comma, space, 1 for me. All right, so we need the actual value, the name, to check. And that, if we recall from if-else is going to call a function. And it will call that function with the value that we're passing into if-else. But if we're calling interpolate right here, that means that we've already called the function. And if-else will not have a function to call. So to solve this problem, all we need to do is to query the function. So let's look up a Ramda function called query. And it takes a single parameter, or it takes a single argument. The parameter is the function to query. And it returns a new queried version of the function. So if you want to learn, or if you're not as familiar with querying or want to learn more, please check out the README for this repository. There's some resources there. All right, so I'll import query. And we're going to call it right here. All right, so now this should be all we need to do for it to work. So let's check and see. All right, it's passing. And just to make sure, we can break it by removing the period and adding it back. All right. Okay, if you're not familiar with querying, as I said, please check out the README. But as a quick illustration, I think it will help to update this signature right here. And it will kind of give us a window into what query is doing. So instead, let's say that interpolate is a function that takes a string and returns a function that takes another string and returns another function that takes a third string. And after that, it returns the final string. So when from these three functions, when the string when each argument is supplied and they're all in scope, then it can evaluate and return the final string. So that's what's happening, and this just gives us flexibility in composing our functions. So yeah, so that's I think that's it for TwoFor. I'll just clean this up by removing this comment down here. And so the last thing, please check out this link right here in the repository. Here's a place to discuss TwoFor if you have questions or would like to explore other solutions to the problem. So thank you very much for watching, and talk to you next time.